Hey, what's up, guys? It's Foster from English no Cru. As you probably know, we are taking a temporary break from our normal routine because we are currently focusing more of our time and attention on our pronunciation and conversation course called Sound School. So, Sound School is an unconventional course that we created specifically for listeners of this show. So, if you're serious about speaking real, confident, conversational English, you should check it out while we are still open for new students. In the meantime, we have something new for you. We are calling it English no Cru Conversations. We have been talking to a lot of different people, having conversations with fascinating people, other teachers, people we admire, our students, and we wanted to share them with you. Because at the end of the day, that is the goal, right? Having conversations with cool people. Welcome to English no Cru Conversations. So the first part of this series about conversations is with Shayna from Espresso English. And I am really, really excited about these conversations because Shayna is, well, she is just awesome. Not only is she a very popular and qualified English teacher, but she also has very deep connections with Brazil. So, in these conversations, you will learn more about Shayna's story, learn some really, really great and important tips for improving your speaking and pronunciation. And Shayna even provided an amazing list of the 100 most common mistakes that Brazilians make when learning English. So we have some really great conversations. I'm excited to share them with you. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. So this series is all about conversations. And as you probably know, having conversations with native speakers is one of the most important things you can do to improve your English today. And with Cambly, having conversations with professional native teachers has never been easier. Literally, with the click of a button, you can talk to a native teacher from anywhere in the world, whenever you want, wherever you want. And the best part is, and the coolest thing is, Cambly and English no Cru are giving you your first English class for free. It is an amazing deal. You should really, really take advantage of it. To get your first class for free, all you have to do is visit Cambly.com or download the Cambly app on your iPhone or Android, and then enter the promo code English no Cru. It's that simple. Just go to Cambly, use the promotional code English no Cru. Start having more conversations today. Okay, let's get on with the show. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of English no Cru Rádio. We have a special guest today. I think a lot of our listeners will already know who this is. Shayna from Espresso English. Shayna, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Foster?
I'm doing very good. Thank you very much for coming on the show. This is quite a treat.
My pleasure. I got started with English teaching in Brazil, so I'm always happy to talk to a Brazilian audience.
Yeah, so I think that's a great place to start. That you got started with all of this. I know a lot of my students either have already taken your courses or are familiar with your work, but I don't think a lot of them know that you kind of have this extensive background and relationship with Brazil. So, could you talk a little bit about how that got started in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So my link to Brazil is because I've been doing capoeira for a very long time. I started in college and I was just hooked on it. And I really wanted to go to Brazil to train capoeira and learn Portuguese and learn more about the culture. And so I studied abroad in Brazil. That was kind of my first taste. And
Mhm.
I loved it. And I thought, I have to get back to Brazil. So I spent quite a few years kind of going back and forth. I would be in the States and work just enough to save up enough money to go to Brazil for 6 months and then train as much capoeira as I could, and then back to the States, back and forth. And I kind of told myself at one point, okay, this is kind of crazy. I'll just do one more big trip to Brazil and then I'm going to come back to the States and live a normal life and settle down and, start dating. And of course, that was when I met my future husband in Brazil, in Capoeira. So we started dating and I ended up settling down, but it was in Brazil, in Salvador, Bahia, instead of in the US.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I feel like it's not such an atypical story, but it's super interesting that you got started with capoeira. So, just a short story on my end. I tried Brazilian Jiu Jitsu first, and I was not very good at it. So, I thought, capoeira might be a little bit easier. It should be a fun physical activity.
Mhm.
It was so incredibly hard. I did 3 classes. It is a serious, serious workout.
You use a lot of muscles that you wouldn't normally use in daily life, and I think that's where some of the difficulty and soreness comes in.
Yeah, yeah, it is extremely hard, but the people in the class were so friendly and so into it. Like it is really when you were in the club, you're deep into it.
Totally, and, I've traveled around a little bit, in Europe and Middle East, and everywhere we kind of go, we hook up with the local capoeira group, and, we always get a big welcome. Sometimes we stay at people's houses, and there's just this automatic connection because of the art, so it's really nice to be a part of that community.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So did capoeira come first or did an interest in Brazil and Portuguese come first?
Capoeira came first. I started training capoeira in a college club here in the US. And that's what led me to Brazil and to Portuguese because the songs in capoeira are all in Portuguese. So I really wanted to know what I was singing and, of course, be able to pronounce things correctly. So that's what got me into Brazil and Portuguese.
Yeah, I remember I think the first thing I heard in Portuguese that I really tried to learn was an old capoeira song. I'm trying to think of it now, like Eu não sou daqui, eu não
Marinheiro
tenho
sou, eu
amor.
não tenho amor, marinheiro sou. Eu sou da Bahia, marinheiro sou. São Salvador, marinheiro sou. It's both a capoeira and I think it's also sung in samba, actually.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot, and I remember I went to my first capoeira class, and I was, like, super nervous, and then they broke out in song, and it was a song I already knew, and I was like, "Marinheira só,
Nice.
marinheira só." It made me very happy. Cool, that's so cool. So, you were in Salvador, you met your husband, and then you started teaching English, is that correct?
Yeah, so I realized, okay, now that I'm staying in Brazil for the immediate short-term future or perhaps long-term, I've got to find something that I can do for work. And so I decided to start teaching English. I actually came back to the US in order to do a CELTA program, which is training and certification. And
Mhm.
then I started teaching both group classes and private lessons in a couple of local schools in Salvador. And that was kind of a crazy schedule because I had both before work classes, so classes that would start at 6:30 or 7 in the morning before my students would go off to their full-time jobs, and then I would have some lunchtime classes, usually in company classes, and then I would also have evening classes, maybe from 6:30 to 9:30 at night. So it felt like a super long day even though the work was all spread out.
Yes, I totally relate to that. Every time someone asks me about teaching English in Brazil, I'm like, it's going to be crazy. I don't know if it will be profitable for you, but it will be crazy. You'll be traveling around the city a lot. It's kind of a wild schedule.
Yeah, and the travel was also a bit annoying because I would just spend a lot of time on the bus, stuck in traffic. Making sure I was able to get to my classes early. The teacher's got to be there a little bit earlier, can't be late. And that was when I would listen to all sorts of podcasts and kind of daydream and think and plan. So I tried to use my bus time productively, but there was a lot of bus time.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really when I got into podcasts as well, is just riding on the bus in Rio. You're teaching at schools, you're teaching in private classes. Was there an automatic transition to starting Espresso English or wanting to teach online, or how did that happen?
So I loved teaching. I loved my Brazilian students. They were always very warm and friendly, and class was fun. But the schedule was kind of getting to me, as well as the relatively low pay. And if class was canceled, I wouldn't get paid. So sometimes holidays, carnival, breaks would kind of affect my salary in a way that I had to make sure to plan for. The
Yeah,
other thing is
yeah.
that there were some factors that were just totally beyond my control. Like we had a couple of police strikes in Salvador, and um, it's not that the city got super dangerous, but the school just decided as a precaution to cancel all the classes for like 3 weeks. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I really need to do something that doesn't depend all the time on local conditions. So that's where I started to think about doing something online. But what really kind of cemented the idea for Espresso English was actually my students. So, just like I had a lot of sometimes trouble getting to class on the bus, my students also had a lot of trouble sometimes attending class frequently. All of my students were working full time. Many of them had families and other commitments, and sometimes just stuff would come up, either an emergency at work or a family commitment, or just the traffic was really bad and they just couldn't always get to class. And two of my students, two women who both had demanding jobs and they both had babies at home, actually, said to me, Shayna, I really want to make progress in my English, but I can't always come to class. Can you please just send me some lessons by email and I will study them on my break at work during the day? And I said, sure, I can do that. So I started just writing up short lessons and sending them to these two students by email. And at the same time, I was like, well, why not post them on a blog? So anyone else who wants to take these lessons can enjoy them. And that was the genesis of Espresso English.
That's amazing. So that's happened super organically, and this was approximately what year?
2011, the beginning of 2012, really.
Yeah, so you've been doing this a while. Well, that's a really cool story just because if there's one thing that my students have in common, it is they're all busy. Everyone's busy and everyone needs more time and they're always pressed for time, especially for studying English. I totally relate to
I
that.
would often tell my students that try to study frequently, even if it's for just a 10-minute period or a 15-minute period. If you can fit that in every day, as opposed to trying to find time in your week to sit down for 2 hours, it's a lot easier to try for 10 minutes every day as opposed to trying to get a giant chunk of time to study. I don't have a huge 2 hour chunk of time to study nowadays. So that's why I always try to make my lessons short and sweet and encourage people to just try to do something every day, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, that would actually help them progress and maintain their level of English better than trying and often failing to come to class once a week or to find time to sit down for a couple hours.
Exactly. I think it really helps maintain consistency. I always recommend to my students, like, what is the smallest amount of time that you can guarantee me that you can study per day? And it can be an embarrassingly low number. And normally my students will be like, 1 hour a day. I'm like, no, just seriously, every single day. And even if it's 7 minutes or 15 minutes, I think that consistency is much better than studying, you know, once every 2 weeks for 2 hours
There are
or
some
something.
fitness videos here in the US. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with them, but like 7-minute abs, like in 7 minutes of exercise a day, you can get great abdominal muscles. So it's like that in English, just like 7 minutes or maybe 10 minutes a day, and you can get really strong in English.
Yeah, I think there are so many connections and analogies to be made between physical activity or any sport or something like that and learning English or any new language
I
for that
actually
matter.
often use that metaphor when talking about pronunciation because there's a very physical aspect to pronunciation. You've spent your whole life with your mouth and your tongue and your lips pronouncing things in Portuguese or in whatever the person's native language is. It takes time to retrain your muscles, right, to pronounce things in English. So a lot of times when students get frustrated at their pronunciation difficulties or that they have a strong accent or whatever, I say, hey, uh, give yourself a break. Remember, you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 years of your mouth pronouncing things one way, and now you're trying to change those habits and pronounce it a different way in English. It takes time to change those habits.
Yeah, and it's truly building a muscle, like building muscle capacity and muscle memory. Something, just an easy example that I always tell my students, like
Mhm.
with the TH sound that doesn't exist in Brazilian Portuguese and a lot of Brazilians struggle with. I mean, imagine the amount of times that we have said the TH as native English speakers, probably in the millions or billions. It is so second nature. But if you've never said that before, it's really difficult and weird to put your tongue out of your mouth and physically
Yes, it
bite it.
is. And I often would have my students do it in a really exaggerated way in front of a mirror. And I'd say, once you get it, the exaggerated way, then eventually you can do it in a more subtle way that we do. We don't stick our tongue all the way out to do the TH, but I tell them to try it that way first, just so they can get used to the position. And then over time, it becomes more and more natural.
Just out of curiosity, did you have a particular sound or words that were really difficult or maybe are still really difficult for you to
Yes.
pronounce in
So
Portuguese?
one that I think almost every maybe I'll say every English speaker always struggles with is the nasalized vowels in Portuguese. So, like the difference between mau and mo, right? So, and I remember like trying to reproduce this, and my Brazilian friends were saying, "No, that's not it. No, that's not it." And I was like, "What do I have to do?" They're like, "No, it's just like this, mo." And I was like, I'm trying. That's what I'm saying. They were like, "Nope, you're not." And they told me, they were like, "Just keep trying, keep listening to Portuguese, right? Because you have to hear it a lot of times also in order to be able to reproduce it, and eventually you'll get closer." And that was the case. Nowadays, I would say my Portuguese is pretty good. I've never had a problem communicating. And of course, with my husband, all our household communication is in Portuguese. But there are still some words that kind of trip me up if I am speaking fast and I just stumble and fall, like cabeleireiro or liquidificador. I've taken to, now that my husband speaks some English, I've just taken to saying blender because it's so much easier.
Yes, those are 2 words that I avoid like the plague, and Alexia is definitely saying, like, "blender," and that is just our spoken language now. I have one of my best friends from high school. He got married recently to a girl from Rio, a carioca, and his new father-in-law is named João, and he speaks a little bit of Portuguese, but not very well, and he cannot even come close with João. It's totally like João, João. So he has to call him John, and it's just such a weird and kind of awkward situation for him, and it just shows a small pronunciation thing can really make a big
Totally.
difference
If
in
you
your
don't
life
have the
sometimes.
confidence, then it just blocks you further from even attempting it if you know that it's going to be wrong most of the time. I had even a couple of my students just on the other side, a couple of my Brazilian students who had really quite advanced English, really strong grammar, great range of vocabulary, but who one of them was traveling in the US, and he was at a convenience store, and the convenience store employee asked him how he was going to pay, and he wanted to say credit card, but he kind of said it like the Brazilian way. He was like credit card, and the person was like, "What?" And he said it a couple more times, and the person didn't understand him, and he was so incredibly embarrassed that he couldn't even say this simple thing. And I told him a couple of things. I said, "Well, first of all, keep in mind that the convenience store employee may have also been an immigrant and not a native English speaker. I don't know what the situation was, so they might not have been used to your accent. But we can definitely work on that pronunciation and help you get it more Americanized." But it really, I was amazed to see how much it shook his confidence. That even though he was really solidly an advanced student, but just that little pronunciation mistake made him unsure about all of his English skills in general.
The small things can have really, really big consequences. So recently I was in Portugal, and obviously the Portuguese in Portugal is quite different. That was a challenge in and of itself. But for some reason, numbers were really difficult for me. So every time that I was paying for something, I just could never catch the number, like how much the item cost. And it was such a blow to my confidence because I'm like, I speak Portuguese really well. And she just said a number. And I asked her to repeat, and she said it again. And I still didn't get it. And yeah, the small things
Definitely.
can
And
hurt
I
sometimes.
think that most English learners actually have too low of an opinion of their English. I'm constantly meeting students who are saying things like, my English is so bad. Sorry for
Totally.
my bad English. Sorry, I'm sure I'm making lots of mistakes. And most of the time, and I bet this is your experience as a teacher as well, most of the time, their opinion is not entirely accurate. Most of the time, their English is a lot better than they give themselves credit for. But because they're comparing themselves to perfection or to native speakers, they think their English is terrible, horrible, full of mistakes. But it's actually pretty good. Yes, there's room for improvement, but I don't think students should kind of tell themselves, oh, my language skills are so bad. I'm so bad. I don't speak English, because it can kind of become a self fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great phrase as well. Self fulfilling prophecy is something that you think long enough that it could actually come true if you believe it for long enough. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That a lot of my students have this idea of just fluency means complete and total domination of the English language grammatically in the written word and everything. And I just try to take a much more relaxed approach. Like, hey, if I can understand you and we can have a fun conversation, then we're
Right.
pretty
The
good
point of
there,
language is
you
to
know?
communicate. And if you can communicate successfully, even if there are a couple of errors or, if the grammar is not perfect, then you're using the language successfully. And, I think it's hard to keep that in mind, but kind of try to. I always encourage my students to keep the focus on successful communication, as well as another kind of tip I like to give is for learners to keep a success journal. So instead of focusing on their mistakes, being like, oh, I pronounced credit card wrong, I can't believe I did that, to focus on what they did well. So, for example, I watched a movie and I understood one entire scene. Maybe I didn't understand the whole movie, but there was one part, one conversation where I got almost everything. Or today I used the present perfect correctly. Or today I learned 20 new words and then I mostly remembered 12 or 13 of them the next day. Things that are successful, so you can and write them down in a notebook
Yeah.
so that over time, like at the end of the year when you're like, oh, my English is still so bad, you can go back and look at that notebook and see, well, no, wait a minute, I did a whole bunch of stuff this year. I learned a lot. Look at all these phrases I learned. Look at all this progress I made.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful idea. I never thought about that with language really because I know they're super popular in the US right now. I'm not sure about in Brazil, but like gratitude journals or just like daily
Hmm.
things that you're happy about or thankful for. Those kind of things are very powerful. Just thinking positively about yourself and seeing progress over
Sure.
time. It's a great idea. Thank you. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of English no Kurhaju. We will be back to our normal episodes with Alexia sooner than later. Until then, we really, really recommend that you start having more conversations. Start speaking more, and if you're really serious about taking your English to the next level, come and join us, participate in Sound School. Now is the time to do it. And of course, if you want to support the show, please leave us a rating and review, tell your friends about the show, spread the word. We will see you guys tomorrow. As always, keep up the good fight and lose well.